Yeah, hey there, Rafaat. This is Michael, the founder, owner, and the materials writer for the 7-step system to pass the TOEFL IBT. I just read your independent writing practice test. I think it's number 19, and I'm going to go over it right now in my word processing program and make all the necessary corrections. So unfortunately, I'm going to put you at about 2.0 out of 5 on this one. So there are some problems, I think, in your development. There's a few problems in your organization, and then there's some problems with your grammar and your vocabulary. So I'm going to go through and show you what kinds of changes you can make that would change your score from 2.0 to 5.0 out of 5. So you can actually improve your score 16 points by following the suggestions in this particular video. All right, so you'll notice I have what you wrote here, and then we have the edited version. And after I'm done with the video and I've produced it and uploaded it to YouTube, in the email I will also send you a copy of the two versions so you can compare what you wrote with the edited version. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at the question. So it says, many people visit museums when they travel to new places. Why do you think people visit museums? Use specific reasons and examples to support your answer. This is a really tough question. It looks easy, but you actually have to be pretty specific, I think, in the examples you're using to help defend the argument you're making. Okay, so you say, every culture in our world has its attractive stories, principles, and also stable beliefs which can distinguish a country from other ones. Although when you travel to any country, you want to watch everything, it's still the museums has a priority overall. Of course, many people prefer to visit them when they travel to new places because they are good reflecting to each culture. We can see in museums of any country many specific things such as precious statues, including their arts of painting and adorning, also the style of their lives and ancient times. Okay, so let's take a look at your word count, and we're always looking for about 350 words. So you are 100 words short. So we have to fatten up, I think, paragraphs 2 and 3 if you want to get closer to that length requirement. Now, maybe even here in the beginning, we can add some things. You say every culture in our world has its attractive stories, principles, and also, I'm going to say stable beliefs, not stabled. Stable is never used as a verb. You could say stabilize, but I think stable, the adjective without the D, is your best word form here. So stable beliefs which can distinguish a country from other ones. Now I think it's time to give an example here. You might say, for example, Egypt has the Great Pyramids, while China has the Great Wall. If you visit India, let's say to visit the Taj Mahal. Now, I'm probably spelling this incorrectly. Now, what did I do here? Is you gave just a general idea here. I like what you're doing in the beginning. You're starting off with some general statements, and I just gave some examples to support that. So you say, for example, Egypt has the Great Pyramids, while China has the Great Wall, or if you visit India, you might say, or if they visit India, visitors can have a chance to visit the Taj Mahal. Then you say, although when you travel to any country, you want to watch everything. Yeah, I think we're having a sentence structure issue here. See if we can figure out what's going on. So you say, although when you travel to any country, that's your dependent clause, you want to watch everything. But then you have, it's still the museums has the priority overall. So in that case, I think we have what's called a run-on sentence here, but what if we said this? Although when you travel to any country, and although you want to watch everything, and now we have two dependent clauses, now we have our independent clause. Still, the museums has the priority over other tourist attractions. Here's the problem here. This sentence is really your thesis. But then you have more of a general statement after it, and then you have, it looks like part of your thesis again, which connects to paragraph 3. So I think we need to do a little bit of work with this thesis. So what I want to do here is put this here. You can put, we can see in museums of any country many specific things, such as precious statues, including their arts of painting, and adorning. Now this is really part of the thesis. You might say, let's see. I'm going to incorporate here. We'll put this is one of your vocabulary words in the vocabulary part of my course. You could use it here. Use more of my words. You could say, and when tourists visit these magnificent works, I'm going to keep it more in that third person plural there. And when tourists travel to any country, they will want to watch everything. It is still the museums. It is still the museums which have the priority over other tourist attractions. We can see in the museums of any country many specific things, such as precious statues, including their arts of painting and adorning, and when tourists visit these magnificent works of art, they can learn about the culture represented in, so they can learn about the culture. Now here's the other problem you have to be careful about here, Rafaat, is culture, and then you have what's called the style of their lives. You have these as two separate things, but culture is really a broader idea, and I think the style of their lives is more of a specific idea, so it's probably better in your paragraphs, I think 2 and 3, to include two specific aspects of the culture or what people can learn from the culture. So culture is really the values, the beliefs, and the principles by which a particular country lives. Right? So what could be learned about the culture? They can learn about the culture and maybe how they lived. Okay, so I think we have made I think we're good here. Now what I'm trying to do is showing you, I think I'd like you, Rafaat, to really take a look at my lessons in the writing part of my online course. Really pay attention to those lessons that talk about creating sharply focused thesis statements, because using the word culture as one key point and then in the style or how they lived as another key point, I think culture is simply too big. And what I've done is I'm now giving you two examples of two cultural elements that can be learned from the museums. One element would be what the ancient people believed, and the second thing would be how they lived in ancient times.
Goodbye.
Okay, sorry about that. Just closing my email, so I'm not going to hear any of those emails when I'm working on your essay. Okay, now in terms of creating, I think these body paragraphs, I think it's a good idea, even before we get to the details, we need to start off with the topic sentences. So you'll say, let's just say, first of all, when people visit museums in a new country, they can learn about the beliefs This is one idea. I'd like to see you do this, is when you do your next essay, what I'd like you to do is before you write the whole thing, I want you to write maybe just the thesis in your first paragraph, and then write the topic sentences in the remaining paragraphs. And let me take a look at that first, and then we'll go from there. Second of all, you'll say, by visiting the museums you say tourists can learn ancient people lived. Now I think we have it. Now once we have this, okay, so now we have to look at what you've done here and ask ourselves, how can we use this information to fit within the context of the ancient beliefs, or how tourists can learn about the ancient beliefs of the people of the culture by visiting the museums? You say when. For example, tourists who visit museums. So tourists who visit museums in Italy can learn can see I'm going to put this up here. So tourists who visit museums in Italy can see the statues adorning, I'm going to say, I think decorations is probably a better word here. The statues and decorations of Michelangelo maybe this is, how about statues the statues and attractive paintings of Michelangelo. How about this? Whose works are so boldly displayed in Rome? Okay, now you know this, you get this grammar here, so I'm saying, for example, tourists who visit museums in Italy can see the statues and attractive paintings of Michelangelo, whose works means his works are so boldly displayed in Rome. By visiting these museums, the tourists can learn how important religion was during the time of Michelangelo, who was commissioned by the king to paint the Sistine Chapel. Tourists will learn from seeing some of these museums that a belief in God was very important to the people. You see what I'm saying? So we have to really defend, we have to create really the reasons why you think people visit museums. So you're trying to argue that there's certain things that people learn from visiting museums, right? But that's the case. That's what you have to do in your body paragraphs, is to help defend that argument. So I'm trying to create some sentences here that will defend the idea that tourists can learn about the beliefs of the ancient people of this culture. That's why I said, for example, tourists who visit museums in Italy can see the statues and attractive paintings of Michelangelo, whose works are so boldly displayed in Rome. By visiting these museums, the tourists can learn how important religion, need a verb here, was during the time of Michelangelo, who was commissioned by the king to paint the Sistine Chapel. Tourists will learn from seeing some of these museums that a belief in God was very important to the people. Okay, now we have to get to the next idea. So far we have 2 paragraphs. Okay, let's move this up a little bit so we can work with it. We have to take a look at what you've done in that next paragraph. Okay, this is another example. Say, similarly, those who visit the museums in Egypt can see the Luxor Let's say something like many of the paintings and structures in Egypt many of which can be visited today. Have existed in their in the same form from 7,000 years ago until now. All right, I think we've improved that a little bit more. So we can get rid of that. We should probably read this. Let's see how we're doing with our word length now. We're getting closer. Okay, we're at 283 right now. The essay right now is longer than your essay was, and I'm only in the second paragraph. Okay, let's go back to what we've done here. So you say, first of all, when people visit museums in a new country, they can learn about the beliefs of the ancient people of this culture. For example, tourists who visit museums in Italy can see the statues and attractive paintings of Michelangelo, whose works are so boldly displayed in Rome. By visiting these museums, the tourists can learn how important religion was during the time of Michelangelo, who was commissioned by the king to paint the Sistine Chapel. Tourists will learn from seeing some of these museums that a belief in God was very important to the people. Similarly, those who visit the museums in Egypt can see the Luxor, an amazing architectural structure which also shows some of the religious philosophies of ancient Egyptians. Many of the paintings and structures in Egypt many of which can be visited today in its museums, have existed in the same form from 7,000 years ago until now. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I'm going to kind of go to the top of the page here. All right. So now we need to do some work on your next paragraph. So you say, second of all, by visiting the museums of a new culture, tourists can learn how the ancient people lived. Okay, so you say, the style lives in ancient times of any country can play an important role to understand their present and their future. It can also be a mirror to their beliefs. The style of lives can be progressed, but the ancient history is usually effective in their coming days. The style, see, you have just too many ideas. You have too many big ideas in this paragraph. This is what's killing your writing. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say that I have a paragraph and I want to talk about different types of fruit, right? So the thesis says, okay, let's, in terms of eating healthy, let's think about eating apples, bananas, and oranges. So in one paragraph, I talk about the benefits of eating apples. In another paragraph, I talk about the benefits of eating bananas. And then maybe in another paragraph, I talk about the benefits of eating oranges. Now, what you're doing, you're not just talking about bananas, apples, and oranges within the same paragraph, you bring up an idea like automobiles or airplanes or something else that's really not connected. So you have to be more specific in what you bring up or what the types of ideas that you mention. So the whole purpose of this second paragraph, if we go back to the thesis, we have to really look at it, is we learn about what ancient people believed and how they lived in ancient times. And that's what we've done here. We have, second of all, by visiting the museums of a new culture, tourists can learn how the ancient people lived. You might say Beijing, China. You might say because tourists can see clothes. What else can they see? They can see kitchen utensils, tourists. So, for example, by visiting museums in Beijing, China, tourists can see clothes, kitchen utensils, weapons, and other ancient artifacts. Maybe thousands of years ago. So when tourists see shoes, and particularly shoes that were designed to make women's feet smaller, ancient Chinese culture placed a high value on, we might say, women's Again, we're going back to understanding, we can understand how people lived. So they sacrificed their how about these ancient women lived with making their feet so small it actually crippled them, but how they looked was more important than any pain the binding shoes cost. The binding shoes cost. Now let's see what we have now. Let's keep working with this. So second of all, by visiting the museums of a new culture, tourists can learn how the ancient people lived. For example, by visiting museums in Beijing, China, tourists can see clothes, kitchen utensils, weapons, and other ancient artifacts that were used thousands of years ago. When tourists see the ancient shoes, particularly the shoes, we can reduce that adjective clause to a participle phrase. They're particularly the shoes designed to make women's feet smaller. They can learn that ancient Chinese culture placed a high value on women's appearance. Therefore, these ancient women lived with making their feet so small that it actually crippled them. But how they looked was more important than any pain the binding shoes caused. Likewise, the tourists who see kitchen utensils such as delicately designed bowls and cups can learn Notice how I did this Rafaat, is in the very beginning I said tourists can see clothes, kitchen utensils, weapons, and other ancient artifacts that were used thousands of years ago. And what do? I mention each of those things and try to give some examples of each of those things in the exact same order that I mentioned them in the beginning of the paragraph. That's what's called a forecast type sentence. A forecast sentence basically mentions points A, B, and C in a particular order, and then I try to go on and illustrate my paragraph by developing those ideas. So you say, I say here, finally, the weapons so often displayed in many museums in Beijing will help tourists understand how sophisticated with its military So the weapons so often displayed in many museums in Beijing will help tourists understand how sophisticated the ancient Chinese, I'm going to say ancient Chinese were. When I say ancient Chinese, I mean Chinese people, even though I didn't say it directly, because I said the ancient, like that, was with its military. Spears, arrows, bows, and other weapons to protect its people from invading armies outside its borders. See what I'm saying there? So I think that's going to work there. Now we're ready for our conclusion. So again, I think like in some of the earlier essays that you've written, you have to get more specific. You're looking at what I've done here. It's difficult. I'll be honest with you. This is a difficult question. Now, I would probably, if I were answering this question, you know, which I wasn't, you were answering this question, but if I did it, I would probably not argue it from the perspective of specifically what tourists learn by visiting the museums. I would probably argue why they visit them in the first place. For example, you could talk about how the country has very clever marketing and other types of advertising type practices that will entice the visitors to see the museums. Right? To me, that would be much easier, I think, to argue than what you're doing, because what you're doing forces you to get specific, to show specifically what it is that people learn from visiting their museums, and then that forces you to bring up things like the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo, Beijing, China, you know, all of those kinds of things. So that's what you have to do, is you have to think about, okay, how can I argue this particular essay, and I can use what I now know, my own vocabulary and my own experience as details to support these ideas. So you just didn't really have enough vocabulary, I think, to really adequately answer this question. Okay, so let's go to the last one. To sum up, if you visit any country, I'm going to get rid of the U here, so to sum up. Visit any country some of the countries' museums, since they will mirror the beliefs and the lives of the ancient people, so often displayed in the museums. Okay, I think we have it. Okay, now let's make some spelling corrections here, and then we'll read it one more time. So the pyramids, so it's a P-Y-R-A, not P-A-R-A. Attractions, visit needs an I in there. Oh, the Sistine Chapel, it's S-I-S. Philosophies. Artifacts, military, visitors. Okay, I'm not going to worry about correcting the spelling in the one that you wrote. Okay, now let's see how many words we have now. We need to get closer to 350. That's what we're looking for. At least 350 words, right? 504, that's a little bit too much. And we can get rid of a few things. So you can say, well, Michael, your paragraphs 2 and 3 are a little bit fat, which is true. At least 350 words, right? Okay, now let's take a look at the whole thing again. Every culture in our world has its attractive stories, principles, and also stable beliefs, which can distinguish a country from other ones. How about just say others? We'll save ourselves a word there. For example, Egypt has the Great Pyramids, while China has the Great Wall, or if they visit India, visitors can have a chance to visit the Taj Mahal. Although, so we might say, when tourists travel to any country, and when they yeah, we need to, this sentence just doesn't work. Let's get rid of the when here. Tourists travel to or maybe when tourists travel to any country, so when tourists travel to any country, they will want to watch everything. And quite often, the museums have the priority over other tourist attractions. I think we got it. So what we did here is we created what's called a compound complex sentence. So it's a complex sentence because of the dependent clause. When tourists travel to any country, they will want to watch everything. And then we have the compound because and. Quite often the museums have their priority over other tourist attractions. I'm going to say they here, not we, because we're using the word they referring to tourists. So they can see in the museums of any country many specific things, such as precious statues, including their arts, including their paintings, and other adornments. How about just say other works of art? And when tourists visit these magnificent works of art, they can learn about the culture, especially about what the ancient people believed and how they lived in ancient times. First of all, when people visit museums in a new country, they can learn about the beliefs of the ancient people of this culture. For example, tourists who visit museums in Italy can see the statues and attractive paintings of Michelangelo, whose works are so boldly displayed in Rome. By visiting these museums, the tourists can learn how important religion was during the time of Michelangelo, who was commissioned by the king to paint the Sistine Chapel. Tourists will learn from seeing some of these museums that a belief in God was very important to the people. Similarly, those who visit the museums in Egypt can see the Luxor, an amazing architectural structure which also shows some of the religious philosophies of ancient Egyptians. The paintings and structures in Egypt, many of which can be visited today in its museums, have existed in the same form from 7,000 years ago until now. Second of all, by visiting their museums of a new culture, tourists can learn how the ancient people lived. For example, by visiting museums in Beijing, China, tourists can see clothes, kitchen utensils, weapons, and other artifacts that were used thousands of years ago. When tourists see the ancient shoes, particularly the shoes designed to make women's feet smaller, they can learn that ancient Chinese culture placed a high value on women's appearance. Therefore, these ancient women lived with making their feet so small that it had actually crippled them. But how they looked was more important than any pain the binding shoes caused. Need to make this plural, past tense. Likewise, the tourists who see the kitchen utensils, such as delicately designed bowls and cups, can learn about let's say, how the upper class people lived in ancient China. Finally, the weapons so often displayed in many museums in Beijing will help tourists understand how sophisticated the ancient Chinese were with its military. They will be able to see that ancient China had designed spears, arrows, bows, and other weapons to protect its people from invading armies outside its borders. To sum up, if visitors visit any country, they will most often choose to visit some of the country's museums, since the museums mirror the beliefs and the lives of the ancient people so often displayed in the museum. So then the conclusion, it kind of ties up the two key points that we argued in the second and the third paragraphs. So you see how that works? Okay, so this is what you wrote here. So I took your essay, I made some changes, and this is how the revised version looks here. So in your version, I think basically what I was saying is you need to develop your ideas more. You need more specific vocabulary to help support the generalizations that you're using. I also said that your strategy, I think, of trying to argue what people can learn from visiting museums was maybe not the best strategy because it requires very, very specific language to argue that particular type of idea. I also told you in this video that it might have been better for you to look at why people visit the museums in terms of the marketing strategies of the companies or the countries who try to entice the people to visit the museums. That probably would have been easier vocabulary-wise, I think, to support or use examples to support that particular argument. All right, well, keep up the good work. Thank you for submitting your independent writing practice test number 19. I look forward to reading your next essay.